Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Brew Hoop podcast. We continue to trudge on through this interminably long off season. If there's football fans out there, I guess you're getting a slight respite from the doldrums of July and August. But we're basketball fans here, and that's really what matters to us. And as per usual, I'm joined by Riley Feldman, but we have a newcomer to the Brew Hoop podcast. But certainly not a newcomer to Brew Hoop. It's my co-managing editor, Mitchell Maurer. Mitchell, how are you doing tonight? How do you feel making this debut and speaking to the masses? They've heard you elsewhere, but how's it feel to be here?
No, they have heard me elsewhere. It feels great to be back on the Brew Hoop podcast after a very, very, very long hiatus from this being a live show. Not live, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
I'm thrilled to see that the Brew Hoop feed is up and running again. This is great. It's great for the site, great for our readership. And what else does the internet need more than an additional Bucks focused podcast?
Yeah, but just more podcasts in general. I think there's certainly a dearth of those out there. Riley, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's a balmy mid-70s up here in Minneapolis, so we've been enjoying early September, but doing well. Thank you.
Good. I'm not even going to describe the scene at my apartment. That was off air. Okay, so I think we have an important exercise tonight, going through a lot of the Bucks roster. But I want to start this thing off by imagine you're down in a boat underneath a mountain, and you're with a creature who has something for you, and that creature happens to be named Mitchell Maurer. And Mitchell, I'd like you to lay this on our listeners.
All right, so I'm definitely not going to do my Gollum impression here because I haven't worked on it and it isn't good. And we have very high expectations here on the Brew Hoop podcast. But here it is for your listeners. I have a riddle for you, and Riley and Adam can take a crack at it as well. So here it is. If I'm too low, it's not a challenge. But if I'm too high, it isn't fair. You can meet me, but cannot shake my hand. I weigh you down, though I'm lighter than air. What am I?
Are you a rainbow?
Oh, I wish I was a rainbow, but no.
Are you an invisible limbo bar?
That actually makes a lot of sense, but no. That's not the answer.
All right. Okay, I'm stumped then. I'm terrible at riddles.
Riley, you want another crack at it or no?
Is it the height of DJ Wilson's hair?
Ooh, again, that's also a good suggestion, but no. The answer, gentlemen, the answer is expectations. Expectations.
Okay.
And I'm going to use a little bit of corporate speak, so everybody that's commuting to their office job now might appreciate this. But I also happen to believe this just as a person as well. So at the very least, I haven't fully sold out, just mostly sold out to corporate America. But on the real, expectations are hugely important in all facets of life. I mean, think about it. Even when you're a kid and your parents tell you, you need to do this so that you can do that. The expectation is that if you do X, that you get Y. And that follows through to school, to the workplace, and everywhere else. And it does follow to sports, basketball. Players at all levels need expectations in order to thrive. You need to set clear, realistic goals so that you have something to aim for. I would say that the vast majority of people, there's some people that can thrive in a looser environment, but the vast majority of people work better, will improve more, and be more efficient with however they try to develop themselves and evolve themselves for whatever their craft might be. In this case, we're talking about NBA basketball players. If they have something to work towards, if they have a goal to work towards. Now, for somebody like, say, Giannis, that goal might be something really tangible, like, I don't know, winning most valuable player for a season. That's something that you can work towards. But the league isn't made up of 1,000 Giannis Antetokounmpos. Thank goodness. There's only one, and we have him. But there's a ton of other players out there, and they all need realistic expectations for themselves. So when I originally reached out to Adam and Riley to guest on the Brew Hoop pod, I wanted to talk a little bit about expectations for players on the Bucks for this season.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect preamble to get into us obviously going through the expectations that Mitchell laid out. So do you guys want to start with the quick hitters at the bottom of the roster, or do you want to go right into the meat of it?
I think we could get some people towards the bottom of the roster out of the way. I don't think we're going to spend too much time on people that are on the bubble, so to speak.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so let's start with let's start with Matthew Dellavedova.
Ooh.
Seemingly much maligned in the ranking the roster series so far on Brew Hoop, yet managing to hold on by a thread. Somehow has survived the first couple cuts. But what do you guys have for initial expectations for what you hope for Matthew Dellavedova in his third year of that delightful contract?
I don't know. I guess you would hope for a slightly better statistical season than what he had last year. And I can try and pull up the per game averages, but I think he averaged about 18 minutes a game, something like 4.3 points, 3.8 assists, 1.3 turnovers, etc. So, I mean, as close to bottom of the barrel of sub rotation point guard production as you can expect. He also led the team in assist percentage, but also in turnover percentage. So I'm not sure what would be a good season for Matthew Dellavedova. Try to not be noticed. It would be ideal if he was replaced by somebody else on the roster who could step up as the second guard. But just keep on keeping on, I guess. More grit. It seems like we don't get nearly that many pretty like defensive highlight plays, which was like what got him paid from coming off of Cleveland. So maybe a couple more defensive highlight plays, but since he's on the bubble and at the bottom of the roster, it's tough to gauge what exactly a good season would be, especially since he's going to come nowhere near matching the production for the amount of money he's being paid for the year.
Sure. Yeah, that's his contract essentially is a sunk cost at this point. If the Bucks are able to move off of it, that would be a boon because generally speaking, a replacement level point guard would probably, for replacement level money, would probably be equal, if not a slightly better impact than Delly has been on the Bucks, especially last season. If we want to put expectations on the players in terms of what would be a good year for them, I think this would be a good year for Delly to understand that he is not the focal point of the offense and he needs to work off ball more. One of our longtime commenters, Old Resorter on Brew Hoop, has long, for at least a couple of weeks now, if not longer, has made the observation that he feels that Dellavedova plays in the NBA a lot like he's practicing for the Australian national team, where he has to be the focal point and he has to be the one to initiate the offense and make things work. Which, sure, for the Australian national team that doesn't have as much talent as most NBA rosters, that might be the case. But if he is going to try to be ball dominant and lead the team in both assist and turnover percentage, maybe he should stop doing that. So I would actually I would love to see those two percentages that you mentioned, Riley, go down. I would like to see his usage go down. I would like to see him spotting up from the arc more, hopefully with more shooting on the roster, which they're going to place around Giannis that might give Delly just enough clearance to load up that musket and shoot his shot from behind the line more often, which is really, I don't see any other way that he can be a successful NBA player. We're at the point with Delly that if he didn't have that guaranteed money, which was a high dollar amount, would he even still be in the NBA? I don't know the answer to that. It's a major question. I think there's enough people out there that would say no, he wouldn't. So if he wants to establish himself as an NBA player, maybe get another contract after this one runs out, he's got to work off the ball more.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to really stack anything upon what you guys said already. I mean, and his numbers haven't been great since he even arrived in Milwaukee. He shot far worse. But in his 2 seasons that he basically had, where he played pretty well with LeBron, he shot 40.7%, 41% in those two second and third year seasons. Since he's got to Milwaukee, only 36.7%, 37.2%. So even with that ratchet release that he's got, you would have hoped that he could make a few more shots.
Yeah.
And I mean, his minutes went down last year. He was at 18.7. He also missed a lot of last year, which I kind of just tended to forget about, even though there was that the long stretch with Brandon Jennings and the other people that we happen to trot out at point guard. But yeah, I think if there's anything that honestly, all I expect for a successful season for Matthew Dellavedova is just like stay healthy. Like if he's just healthy and we at least have a warm body, like a third guard who can come in and is willing to do the kind of stuff that you guys have already said. I think that's really all you can expect from a guy who you just want to be able to fill in spot minutes, make sure that your roster, you don't reveal more holes in the roster by the fact that you're already going down to Dellavedova, and if you have to go even further, then you kind of see where the Bucks kind of got into trouble last year when they had to resort to Brandon Jennings and so on and so forth. So for Dellavedova, honestly, all you got to do is stay healthy, man. That's all you got to do for me. So we're really setting the bar high to start here. So let's move on to another quick one. How about the new arrival, Pat Connaughton? What are you guys hoping for him? What do you think, Riley?
I was listening to the Locked On podcast, Locked On Bucks podcast. Shout out to Frank and Eric, but they were talking about how Pat had played in 82 games for Portland last season, which I hadn't realized, even though I've obviously been poring over his basketball reference page ever since we signed him. I think the idealized role we just discussed for Delly, where he's the off-ball guard, where he just kind of posts up in the corner, and if you could, convert threes at a roughly, acceptable rate, where he made 35.2% last year. If you could increase that just like by a percentage point or two, I think that would be super valuable. I don't come in having a lot of expectations. It would be crazy to assume that he would be able to come in and be like, a ball dominant guard or be able to run the offense or anything like that. So I think a quick off the bench microwave scorer would be awesome. I don't expect him to get a lot of rotation minutes, but I don't know if he can replicate what he did for Portland, which was the best ability is availability and make a couple threes. You can't really ask for much more from Pat, can you?
I definitely don't think so. I feel like the bar is super low for Pat Connaughton, partially because he is signed to a really cheap contract and he signed super late in the summer relative to a lot of his other his free agency peers. But yeah, he takes about half of his shots over his career from 3-point range. He reportedly is a really good athlete, which is good. And the fact that he played nearly 1,500 minutes for the Trailblazers last year, and they were a good team in the Western Conference. Like that does speak well to his ability to justify staying on the floor as more than just a floor spacer or a shot taker. So I don't think he has to do much in order to have a good year. So it really is going to come down to making the best of his limited opportunities. Nobody's going to expect him to be in the rotation to start. He might have an excellent camp, an excellent preseason, and might break his way into the rotation. And as a shooter, he certainly will be able to fill a need on this team. So if he gets off to a hot start, then there's no telling where his season could go, and he might defy all of our expectations, which would be exciting.
Yeah, I feel like I'm intrigued to see whether his 3-point shot holds up. I mean, the 2 seasons prior, he had only attempted. Granted, he had played in 34 and 39 games, but combined, he only attempted 54 shots. Last year was basically his first time getting up to high volume, 210 attempts from 3, 35.2%. So I'm curious if that's a blip or if that's going to hold on. And if it sticks to 35.2 or 36.2 on a relatively decent volume, he had 5.1 attempts per 36. I think that's about all you can ask for the guy. And I was, like Mitchell said, the Trailblazers weren't anything to sneeze at. Granted, they got wiped out in the playoffs, but during the regular season, they were one of the better teams, and he was playing in a relatively advanced offense under Terry Stotts. We'll have to see how he manages working off the fact that sort of the main creator is at the 4, as opposed to he's used to sort of working on the wing, and the backcourt guys are attracting all the attention. So I'm not sure how that would shift his thinking or shift his spacing in Bud's offense. Presumably, he'd be able to just sort of fit into that wing role that Bud's done in the past. But I think for me, it's primarily just seeing if that 3-point percentage that he shot last year holds up, and if that's real or whether it might have been a slight mirage. So, all right, next one, quick hitter. Let's do John Henson.
John Henson. Okay, what does John Henson have to do to have a good year? He had a pretty good year last year. So even if he just replicates that, that's that's gonna be a meets expectations in my book. I mean, I would truly love for him to play every minute that he gets on an NBA court, like his lifetime line of credit Chipotle would count on it. But he's so inconsistent. Like he never has it going when things with the team are good, and then he kind of comes out of nowhere when nobody expects him to come out of nowhere, and he'll like randomly put up a double night or like 10 points and a half or something like that. I mean, he is what he is. He's been in the league for how many years has he even been in the league at this point? It's been a while for him, I feel like, because he's
seventh season.
Yeah,
seventh season. He's not the oldest Buck on the roster, but he's like one of the longest tenured. If not for Ersan's multiple stops elsewhere before returning, he would be like the longest tenured Buck, I think, which is weird because he's not old, but he's reached his ceiling. Like maybe his ceiling was higher when he was younger, but he just never got there, and now he is what he is. He's got to repeat what he did last year, and just try all the time, even if you don't feel like it. That's the best thing I could say at this point.
You sound like a little league coach.
Well, I'm practicing. My son's only 3.5, so I got time to hone that message.
Riley, what do you want from John Henson?
I think it really depends on what role he ends up taking in the center rotation, especially. So for him, I think we're all assuming that Brook Lopez hopefully ends up being the starter just for schematic reasons and blah, blah, blah. So if he's going to be the backup big, he has to, one, beat up on, which we could argue should probably not be that hard of a task for him. And then two, as Mitchell was saying, he's super inconsistent, especially when he comes off the bench. He's always seemed to do a lot better when he's in the starting unit for whatever reason. I don't know if that's just like a mental thing for him or what, but if you could provide equivalent amount of production given a lowered minute load for the year, I would say that's probably for the best. And I'm not too worried about him if he doesn't get a lot of minutes, because Thon is getting developmental minutes for one reason or another of him turning into a chaos engine and like a locker room breaker. I really don't think that's John's style. And he's making a lot of money to not be a troublemaker. So I would just say solidify the rotation big spot, be the reliable guy on the inside in case for whatever reason Bud wants to play that style for a few minutes here or there, and don't cause trouble if you're not getting a lot of minutes.
Yeah, that would be, sorry, really quick, I want to jump in because it's funny, just we have this perspective as fans and as people that kind of cover the team and have an investment in the team succeeding. But if you were to try to get out of that frame of mind and put yourself in the shoes of the player, like for John Henson to have a good year, doesn't he just have to like stay on the roster and get paid? And isn't that a great year to get $10 million and just hang out and play basketball sometimes and just kind of go through it easy breezy because nobody else expects him to improve? Like
I feel like that's like kind of been like the joke for years though. It's just that's just like what he's doing. He's just kind of like riding around and doing his own thing. Occasionally he gets excited like when
that's true.
Matt Barnes wants to fight him, but
Matt Barnes retiring was the worst move for John Henson's career.
You know what? The Bucks should hire him. They should bring him on
as an assistant coach.
Yeah, just like fight him before every game. I think for me, Riley was sort of got to the root of it for me, which was role, and I think in Bud's offense, which hopefully will involve a lot more motion, a lot more passing. I think I'm really intrigued to see if John Henson can fit into that in an economical way, in an efficient way. I have gone on the record as being a big fan of some of his bounce passes from the high post last year. I think he has some decent passing ability for a big, as long as he's able to keep his head up and that kind of stuff. So for me, a successful season is if he's able to fit into Bud's system in a way that I don't really think he's going to be shooting threes, God forbid. But if he's able to keep the ball moving and finding guys who are shifting around on the exterior, guys who are setting screens, maybe it's like Tony Snell or Sterling Brown running around a screen and that kind of stuff. If John Henson is able to find those guys from the inside, I'll find that to be a relatively successful season.
Yeah, and the beauty of John, just final note on him is, yes, he's totally a finished product, but at least we all have a really good idea of what exactly he can do competently. So if there are ways So that's being a known quantity. While that's a little boring, that's helpful in its own way as well. So if he can kind of play to those strengths in limited minutes, then that would be a huge plus for us.
That's true. All right. Well, let's go on to hotly anticipated DJ Wilson. I know, Mitchell, we can just sort of clear the floor for this one. You had you were ready for this.
I'm ready. This was actually the first one that I wrote when I did my notes for putting together expectations for the team. If I was in any way, shape, or form related or involved with the Bucs coaching staff, I would put DJ Wilson in a room and sit him down and get a chair and sit across from him, look him right in the eye, and say to him, in order to justify being in this league, I need you to show one NBA level skill. Just one. Just one skill. Pick one. I don't care what it is. If it's shooting, great. That's super valuable. That might get your third-year option picked up. If it's, ball handling, because he fancies himself a ball handling forward / center, okay, that's fine. That's interesting, I guess. It's not super helpful, but it's at least something at an NBA level. I'm not going to even say rebounding because that's silly. Rim protection, he's got good length. He's got somewhat decent instincts. He doesn't play with any sort of physicality, but if he's going to be a weak side shot blocker, that's an NBA level skill. He didn't play enough minutes for him to really garner any attempts or chances to pass the ball. So maybe he's going to be a really good passer. I don't know what he's going to be. I do know where he's going to be if he doesn't show a single NBA level skill, and that is out of the NBA and soon, because Hachi Machi, he hasn't done anything in any setting since leaving Michigan.
Oh, the Hachi Machi. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a successful season for DJ Wilson, from his perspective, is he literally just gets his third-year option picks up. And because I just doubt he's going to make any sort of contributions on the team. So I really think that's the best he can hope for at this point.
And I will follow that up. I agree on all the points. And if you get sent to the G League, please just feast on G League, guys. Don't post really upsetting stat lines night after night. I mean, for God's sake, you are end of the bench material, but it's NBA end of the bench. So at least show you have that commiserate NBA or that level of talent against G Leaguers.
All right. From one guy that's relatively... Oh, that was never mind. I was about to say he's young, but we just drafted him. He's pretty old. So we're going to get Dante DiVincenzo in here. Mitchell, what are you expecting out of Dante DiVincenzo this year to have a successful season?
I kind of have similar expectations for him as I do for Pat Connaughton and some other players on the roster that we haven't gotten to yet. I want him to take advantage of the opportunities he gets, which may be pretty limited at the beginning, and just show how you're going to persist as an NBA player. He's probably going to be a shooter, which we've seen from his time at Villanova, and it's definitely a skill that's valued in the league and on this team with Mike Budenholzer aboard and Giannis running things. If he can demonstrate that he is an NBA-level talent, that would be a great year. And it doesn't matter how many minutes. He's just going to make the best of the minutes that he gets. I don't expect him to be a part of the rotation. I don't expect him to necessarily be anywhere near the Rookie of the Year conversation or even invited to the All-Rookie showcase game that they have on All-Star Weekend. But he needs to show that he belongs. That's it. Very low bar for him.
I would agree. And it's difficult because we only saw him for 28 minutes, I think, in the summer league. So it's not exactly, we didn't have much to extrapolate off of that. But I would say if you could do something like get the number of appearances that Sterling Brown did last year, which was 55, I believe. So if you can have 50-ish appearances, I say that would be good. And then I think it depends on what Bud's approach is going to be. But if we're all assuming that Dante was kind of a Bud influenced pick, he's probably going to get some throwaway minutes right away at the start of the season, I would predict, just to prove a point essentially, or for Bud to prove a point. So if you could take advantage of that, and if you could do something like be a more consistent shooting and maybe a little bit more of a better playmaker than, let's say, Matthew Dellavedova, who, as we discussed, he was doing a lot of on-ball stuff, but he wasn't super effective at it. Whereas Dante, he showed a little bit of playmaking ability in college with his assist rate and things like that. That's obviously not going to mean he should be the lead point guard or the lead point guard for the bench unit. But if he could show a little bit of something beyond shooting, especially with the ball in your hands. I think that would be a big plus.
So, I mean, the recurring theme so far, obviously, we're at the bottom of the roster, so it's relatively a low bar for all these guys. But are we? I mean, it was a lot of just obviously franchise speak and organizational speak after Dante was drafted. But one of the things that they talked about was they basically were like, we want a guy who can pass, shoot, dribble, do all those kind of things. Basically, they wanted the equivalent of like a 5-tool player. They also drafted him, and they thought that he was a little older. And I mean, John Horst said it's tough for a rookie to do this, but they kind of want him to contribute right away. So do you guys, I mean, obviously we have our own expectations, but are these expectations too low, do you think? I mean, compared with what the organization might hope?
We might be a little gun shy because of the Bucks' track record with drafting in the mid-first round. Giannis excluded, of course. He just needs to show he's an NBA player, in my view. If he does somehow break into the rotation, and let's say he takes Delly's minutes from last year, like if Dante DiVincenzo somehow plays 18 minutes a game instead of Delly, like I'll be floored. I don't expect him to play any more than like 10 to 12 minutes a game, at least during the stretch of the season where the team is competitive. You know, it's a long season. There's lots of things that can happen. I do expect them to be competitive for all 82. But at least at the beginning, like he's just got to prove that he can hang. If he can get off the bench, even at towards the end of quarters and at points where the game isn't on the line, and just show that he can hang on the floor, like that's enough for me.
Yeah, so I mean, I would tend to agree. I'm relatively in line with you guys. I think it's important to see whether some of the traits that he showed at Villanova, which honestly, I'm not super in love with his individual skills. I don't know if all that kind of stuff is going to translate, but if he can meld into a team construct, which seemed to be essentially why they drafted him, is they thought he was an older player who went through a similar sort of egalitarian system in college and was willing to share the ball and knew where to take it and knew when to drive, knew when to pick his spots. I think if he's able to show he fits into Bud's system in an effective way that also is coupled with his 3-point shooting translating at least on some level. I mean, if he shot 34%, I mean, that would be encouraging, at least for me to start. And I'd also like to see if some of the athleticism that he touts is just noise or whether it's actually functional. Like I'm very curious to see if that kind of stuff is going to translate. So I would say I'd like to see some of that athleticism for a successful season be translated slightly functionally, whether it's even if it's just alley-oops or getting out, helping lead in transition. I know there's some tape from college that he gets a steal or whatever, and then he makes a really quick pass up the floor, which I know has been a bugaboo for some Bucks guards who are leading transition breaks. So if he's able to show just some of those basic skills that he flashed in college, and like Mitchell said, be an NBA player, then I think that'll be a successful season for him too. Anything else on Dante?
Try to get that nickname changed. I'm going to keep on that no matter till I die.
I'll second that.
Sake.
All right, so we'll work on that. We'll see if we can come up with a better one. All right, let's move to the new additions this offseason. Let's start with Ersan Ilyasova. Arrives back by way after he spent some time with Bud in Atlanta. Seemingly seemed to be a Bud hire. Zach Lowe alluded to the fact essentially on his podcast the other day. So, Riley, what are you expecting out of Ersan this year to have a successful year?
So first things first, turn out to not actually be 45 years old. If we could work on that, that would be an awesome update right out the gate. And then
are you starting a birth certificate movement again?
Well, we might as well just get it.
Dangerous ground. Abort. I
take it back. No, I think an ideal world or what a good season for Ersan with the Bucks would be him working his way into the closing lineups, which I think is a distinct possibility depending, one, because he seems to be a Bud guy, and two, his style of play as potentially a small ball 5. Definitely is interesting and works well with Giannis and could be interesting for depending on what the other team, what kind of look they're giving you. But in terms of stats and things like that, he's been so consistent with his per game averages for years on years now. So if you could continue at roughly your, career averages, that would be gigantic. And I think just being available to offer the team that small ball 5, which we haven't really had in, I don't know, ever since the movement kind of began, I think that would be ideal.
Yeah, that actually goes pretty closely into where I'm headed with my expectations for Ersan, because to your point, he's remarkably consistent. He plays in, roughly the same number of games, the same amount of minutes, scores the same amount of points, the same amount of rebounds, takes, at least one charge every couple of games, which is good. Like, he's a useful player. For me, for him to be successful this season on this team, and it has nothing to do with his contract, which a lot of people have issues with. I'm probably a little bit more forgiving of it than most, but I want him to try and match his career high in terms of percentage of number of minutes played at the center position. If you guys want to hazard a guess as to what that percentage is? So out of 100, out of the whole pie chart for Ersan's minutes, what do you think is the highest number that he hit for a whole season?
25.
Yeah, I was going to say like 20% probably.
Yeah, it was actually his rookie year in Milwaukee in 2006. He was at 31%.
Wow.
He played 31% of his almost 1,000 minutes at center based on Basketball Reference, which is super interesting to me. Over the last,
let's see who else was on that team.
Yeah. Oh man, let's go down that rabbit hole on a different episode because whoo boy. But over the last couple of years, like in 2015-16, he played between Detroit and Orlando. He only played 4% of his minutes at center. 2016-17, it was all the way up to 16% across his time with Philly, Atlanta, and a couple of games in OKC. And then last year it was at 17% with between Atlanta and Philly again. I would love to have him double that and play roughly a third of his minutes as a center. I don't know if that's realistic, and that does, edge into the minutes that Brook Lopez is probably going to get and deserve. Whatever minutes Thon gets, which deserved or not, he's going to get time, but it remains to be seen how many minutes he'll get over the course of the whole season because it's going to be less developmental and more based on merits, i.e. how much he's actually contributing. And John Henson. Those are all competitors at the center position for minutes with Ersan. But yeah, to Riley's earlier points, like his, the rest of his career is not long. He's not going to play more than the 3 years on his contract currently, and that last one's unguaranteed. But he's got the height. He doesn't have length, but he's got the bulk to handle center, especially as the league gets smaller. It makes a lot of sense for him to be a small ball five that stretches the floor. He's a passable post defender. He's definitely not a switchy center. He's not going to keep up with people on the perimeter, but he was not going to do that as a power forward either. So that's what I want to see from him because we know what we're going to get. I want to see where we're going to get it from. And I would like to see it from the center position more than we've ever seen before.
So I was just looking at the math. So if he played like roughly a third of his minutes, it would be around 8 minutes a game at center. Tack that on to Brook Lopez at probably around 24, 25. So we're at 32. So it leaves 16 minutes basically for Thon Maker and John Henson. And I don't know, when you think of Ersan at the five, it's like you just don't particularly, is it Giannis is in there probably, and so they're just interchangeable?
That's kind of the way that I would imagine it.
Okay.
Because Giannis on defense is historically been at his best when he can play free safety and he can come in off the weak side for the block at the rim, or if he is able to step into passing lanes whenever the offense tries to make that skip pass, which they think is open, but he's longer than almost every human that's ever existed. So he is far more likely to come away with a steal there. 4 minutes a half makes a lot of, and maybe it's not quite 4 minutes, maybe it's 2 or 3.
Yeah.
But those are those stretches in games where teams go on those big runs that really shift the balance of a specific contest. And if you string enough of those contests together, then you're putting together a really strong trend with what your team can be about. I mean, this is not that they're, at least this season and possibly ever, not that they're ever going to be on the level of the current Golden State Warriors team, but I would wonder how much time they spent in the regular season experimenting with Draymond at center and seeing what that unlocked for their team. And I think that Ersan could unlock a lot for the Bucks at center, and I really want to see them commit to that experiment, at least early on, to see if it works.
I tend to agree with you guys. I'll just be curious to see how Bud would suss out the rest of the center rotation then with 15, 60 minutes between Thon and Henson. I mean, we already said Henson seems fine riding the pine, but I don't know. I guess it kind of depends how you're balancing those. The development of Thon, how much, will John Henson ever get, I know we said he probably won't ever get unruly, but I feel like at some point you're going to be a little discontent to almost never be playing when you started for a lot of the year prior. So I'll be interested to see that. So I don't have any other revelations for Ersan. My thing was basically in line with you guys, which was to see him play center. I think like Mitchell touched on a lot of the points I was thinking of, which were trying to unlock the Bucks offense, give them a lot more spacing, just provides another shooting option that can allow Giannis the ability to get in there, because sometimes Brook Lopez will want to operate by the rim. Same with John Henson. Thon Maker shouldn't, but he might be down there. So, at least in this way, it's sort of a foolproof way to be like, yeah, this is a guy who can be on the outside and be a credible threat.
Yep. Now, I guess the only final two thoughts I have is I think it'll be interesting seeing how he works with whoever the backup big is, assuming that Ersan's probably going to be playing mostly sub minutes as a forward and then the occasional small ball center minutes as well. But if he's a guy who's out there with like Thon Maker, who is not renowned for his rebounding, for example, is he able to kind of make up for that? And then how do those two guys who are both, kind of space bigs, at least in theory for Thon, how does that work?
I have a terrible feeling in the pit of my stomach about the idea of an Ersan Thon front court. I just, like, rebounding aside, like, Thon's instincts have historically been so poor, and Ersan's getting up there in years, so he's got decent instincts, but he's only got so much to work with. Like, those two together sounds like they would hemorrhage points just thinking about it off the top of my head. So hopefully do the thing I said, not the thing that we just said now, because that sounds terrible.
Yeah, I'm going to edit that out, Riley.
Fine. But the only other thought I have is if we could make your step back jumper like half a second quicker, that would be so valuable for this team. That's all I have to say.
Agreed.
I mean, the best part is that Giannis has that step back jumper too now. It's just weird how Ersan is like on his step back. He's so wooden in the air. Like he's like you could just blow him over and he'd be like a frozen golem. I don't know how he does that, but yeah, I'd like it to be quicker as well. All right, let's go to the other new arrival, Brook Lopez. Mitchell, what do you want out of Brook Lopez this year?
I think you already mentioned his minutes per game at 24, and that's where I wanted him to max out at 24 minutes a game. His movement, his mobility has never been there. That's not the kind of player he is. He's a mountain of a human. He's a massive, massive big man in a league where there are only a few massive big men left. So I want him to try and be what Greg Monroe was supposed to be 3 years ago. I want him to really focus on being an effective scorer, stretching the floor, which he's just started to show the last 2 years. And whatever boost he can bring to the defensive rebound rates is sorely needed on this team, which the infamous Jason Kidd once quipped, no, we don't have to worry about it because we don't rebound. His whatever magical aura he carries with him that increases his team's chances of corralling loose rebounds on defense would be huge. He's a guy kind of similar to Ersan in that we generally know what we should expect from him statistically, so we don't need to really dive into what gains he needs to make on the stat sheet. But I don't want him playing any more than 24 minutes a game because I really value mobility from the center position, but I also value shooting. And he, at this point, depending on how Thon does, but he's probably the best shooter out of all the centers, right? Like I would even put him on a similar level, maybe not in terms of attempts, but in terms of accuracy. Like he's on a similar level as Ersan as a shooter. So if he can have that trailer three in his pockets, or he can work the pick and pop game, as well as making people pay on the block when they try to defend him on post-ups. Not that I want to, feed him a steady diet of post-ups because that's not exactly modern basketball, but there's a place for that. There's a time and a place for that. And I want to see him just, stay available and do what he can for literally half of every game.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, just some stats before I send it over to Riley. 34.6 on 5.2 attempts in 2016-17 for Brook Lopez. 34.5% with the Lakers last year on 4.4 attempts per game. So, yeah, I mean, a relatively good percentage. Most people know those stats. So we'll have to see what he can contribute this year. But, Riley, what do you want out of Brook?
I would say so. It's actually obviously it's been hashed over a million times how crazy the shift of like shot selection for Brook has been over the past 3-4 seasons. Last year he had about 41% of his shots were 3-pointers. I think if you could, I'm not sure if it needs to increase any further past that because that's a lot of 3-point shots for a 7+ footer to be taking. But I think ideally if he can offer that option of, like Mitchell was saying, a trailer three or the occasional bailout three, depending on how the offense is running. But also, he's still a gigantic guy who can be there as a sort of a bailout option underneath the basket. Part of the beauty of Brook is that he'll be able to space the floor, whereas for Giannis, especially, whereas in the past, John Henson would be down there and, waiting to take some sort of, lefty hook shot. Whereas I think Brook, while he doesn't really have the speed or nimbleness to be able to kind of move with Giannis to be an off-ball option, if he could take an equivalent number of threes and then also kind of stand there as a pressure release valve for guys who are diving towards the basket, that would be ideal. He doesn't really have to do a lot, to be honest. I think last year his total per game rebounding was only 4, I believe you said. So if you can get that slightly higher, that would be awesome. But maybe like we were saying, the magic of Brook Lopez will just increase the rebounding numbers no matter what.
Yeah, raw figures just 4 rebounds a game last year with the Lakers, but obviously some of that is due to him stretching out the floor a little bit.
Oh, one more point. And ideally, if he could allow the offense or rebounds to kind of fall in Giannis's lap and let Giannis just go with the ball, if he's able to do that consistently and that just unlocks that part of the offense a lot more, I think that would be a gigantic plus for the team.
Yeah, Mitchell was talking earlier about him being Greg Monroe, and I think it's an interesting comparison because Greg Monroe obviously brought a different element. He wanted to bring the down post scorer who could get his buckets when we need him, whereas Brook Lopez is the complete opposite. He's going to help unlock the offense a little more by working around the perimeter. But the thing that scares me about Brook Lopez is his defensive ability. I mean, he's never been known as a stalwart, athletic guy who can work around the paint in any sort of definitive way and deter shots in a super meaningful way. If you just look at his defensive RPM last year, he was, say what you will about the stat, but he was ranked 67th out of 79 centers, 9 spots above Thon, which is a good sign, I guess.
Yeah.
So he was just above neutral. So he was 0.09 in defensive RPM. So say what you will about that stat, but the Lakers were relatively good on defense last year, 13th by defensive rating according to NBA.com. So, it's not like Brook Lopez was the huge part of that, but because I guess for me, the thing I'm looking at going into this season I'm probably putting the biggest microscope on the defense to see if that improves, because I mean, our offense has been top 10, the last 2 years, even with Jason Kidd's poopy offense. And I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, and Bud will optimize it in a lot of meaningful ways. But yeah, I think the defense has probably the most potential to improve in a way that could make Milwaukee actually make the leap that they're looking for. And I'm afraid Brook Lopez is going to be the leaky faucet at the bottom. So I'm hoping for me to have a successful season for him. I think he's going to do the same stuff he's always done on offense that he's done the last 2 years, but I would like him to be an average center and on defense.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. You have to be able to, I want him to be able to play 24 minutes and make a lot of contributions on offense, but he has to justify that with passable defense. And I know his block numbers are historically pretty good because he's tall, he's long, he's got decent instincts, but he's super slow. He's slow-footed, and that's fine. He's 275 pounds, so he's gonna not be quite as quick as Thon. But yeah, if he can justify staying on the floor with that passable defense, that'll be a huge boon. I'm very fascinated to see what Budenholzer does with him.
All right, well, let's touch just super quickly on Tyler Zeller. If Tyler Zeller happens to make the roster this year, what is something that you guys hope to see out of him?
Man, I don't even know. If he makes the team, that's a good kind of along the John Henson line. If he makes the team, that's by itself a good year on his non-guaranteed deal. But that being said, he is pretty reliable. It's not the highest floor in the world, but you know what you're getting. He does a lot of the little things. I recall that Eric Name wrote an article that was focusing on Tyler Zeller and trying to figure out what that special sauce was that he had, and like how he kept staying relevant in the NBA as the NBA grew smaller and smaller and valued different things than he, as a very conventional center, offers. We never did find out what that secret was, but we know that there is something. So he's going to keep doing that thing. What would be nice, maybe not even as a good year, but it should be a great year for him if he makes the roster. If he can show off a little bit more of that corner three that he flirted with in Brooklyn, he didn't shoot a ton of them, and he only shot them okay, but that's something that would be nice. If you replace Tyler Zeller with one of the other non-guaranteed options like Shabazz Muhammad or Christian Wood, like I wouldn't feel remarkably different about the team. So yeah, I guess he's just going to make the team, and that's good enough for him and good enough for me.
And you mentioned Brooklyn, of course. He played under Kenny Atkinson, a former disciple of Budenholzer in Atlanta. So maybe they're talking just a little bit about what Zeller could maybe offer if you didn't like what he was seeing under Jason Kidd last year. You expecting anything out of Zeller this year, Riley?
I would agree with Mitchell's take that getting on the roster is a huge plus for him. And then after that, I could definitely see a world where if he makes the initial cutoff, which is probably going to be more so just like front office weighing, whether or not they want to ride with Thon and John as like the two backup bigs. But he does, like we're saying, the little things, but he's just like a very average but very workable center. And we saw it in a couple of games where he featured alongside a lot of the starting units for short stretch last season. But he's a very competent pro, and he seems to pick up on his role in the offense pretty easily. So if he's able to make the roster, he's not going to get, I can't imagine him getting crazy minutes, but he could probably work his way into like somewhat regular, like not end of the bench, but like third center minutes, maybe even second center, depending on if John Henson is, just kind of loafing around and Thon is a complete bust. So I think make the roster first and then make your way into regular rotation match, which probably isn't the craziest situation or possibility in the world.
Yeah, I can foresee a mid-January, early February stretch where Tyler Zeller overtakes Thon and John Henson, and we sort of get our stretch of Zeller playing competent play, and then we all sort of realize that he's just kind of what it is. And if he happens to make the roster, and then we all sit into the doldrums and wait for
all good things must come to an end.
That's true. Very true. And let's have these sort of older players who, honestly, I don't think will spur as much discussion. Let's have that all come to an end. So let's move on to a bit more of the meat of the roster, which is some of the younger players and people that at least personally, I would consider more part of the potential core for this Bucks team. So let's start with Thon Maker. Obviously, a very divisive subject. So, Mitchell, what do you expect for a successful season out of Thon this year?
For a long time, my one prescription for Thon was always just get stronger. Find a way to strengthen your lower body. Get some more muscle on your legs. Get some more muscle in your core. Like find a way to not get pushed around all the time. And man, some people just shed weights and don't get maybe he doesn't have the frame to actually build that kind of muscle to really become a more physical presence as a center. So I kind of have to abandon that. I don't think that's going to happen. So maybe lean the other way. Like maybe focus on getting faster. Maybe focus on agility and finding ways to really leverage your speed and your length more, because those are the things that actually make him special. Like it kind of goes back to, it's the same idea as people thought about his mixtape when he was showing off like these outrageous handles for a center and pulling up for three. Like those are cool basketball things, but those are not useful NBA center things. Not unless you are a true freak of nature, right? And he's not that. So if he is going to, we all want to see more playoff Thon. We want to see playoff Thon from November on. So I don't know what it takes to get there. Like whatever his physical limitations are, he's got no strength. He's got no verticality when there's a crowded space. His hands are terrible. Whatever. I don't care what he has to do to try to become playoff Thon on a permanent basis. That's what I want to see.
What about you, Riley?
So my first two notes for Thon were show us any in all caps sign of life, and then do something all in caps at an above average level. It's so frustrating because you like the thought of Thon, but then like the reality of Thon is really frustrating. And the other thing I had was you should definitely be earning the second center or the whatever rotation center minutes above John Henson. If you can't do that, then we could wrap it up. But you should be definitely earning that if it's going to be a good year. And then you're probably not going to see any more than like, I don't know, 14, 15 minutes per game at like, at the outside. So please just bring all the energy. If you're pretty much everything Mitchell just said, but echoing it, you could be the energy guy. Like, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to be the energy guy for, a 5-6 minute stretch. And you don't even have to be like playoff Thon level energy, but just something. And then also if you could get your 3-point percentage back up, because that's an intriguing tool to have. He only shot 29% like almost 30% last season, but that was after his rookie year shooting 37.8%, which was, exciting when it went down. And then last year it didn't seem like he really hesitated per se, but there was a weird thing with a lot of the guys on the team under Jason Kidd where there seemed to be hesitance about shooting threes. So maybe within Bud's system, we can fix that. And, that becomes a more reliable part of his game, but please just show us any sign of life. Please, Thon.
Yeah. I'll say this. I'll say this much. Like, the shooting is what it is. Like, as long as he takes shots and they're good shots, like, I'll forgive a lack of accuracy, over short stretches. If he just forgets how to shoot and can't make shots, then that's a different story. But I hope for his sake, for Thon's sake, that Budenholzer does enable switching on defense for him, because if Thon isn't switching and he isn't using that length and quickness on the perimeter to his advantage, like, what can he do on defense? His instincts are just not good in general. Like, I don't see him as being like a weak side rim protector the way that Giannis is. He's got the measurables for it, but I don't think he's got the mindset for it. Like, for whatever reason, we haven't seen him do a lot on defense other than switching and defending on the perimeter, which he could be pretty good at. So as long as Budenholzer enables him to do so, I think he could have a good year. If he's expected to do something different, if he's expected to play center the same way that Brook Lopez is, which I don't think he will be. I think that Budenholzer is flexible enough to tailor the system to the talent on the team. But if he's going to be expected to do other things, I don't know how capable he is, and that could threaten his NBA livelihood, really.
Yeah, I think keeping him engaged in a way, almost like a Jabari, like hiding him on ball. I think keeping him like engaged and that kind of stuff where he doesn't have to work in space and think too much. And who knows, maybe this scheme that Bud's going to install isn't as complicated and hopefully is less rigid than Kidd's scheme, as you alluded to, Mitchell. So hopefully he'll be able to keep him engaged and allow him to leverage his tools in a more meaningful way. So the thing I had was I wanted Thon to, like Mitchell said, shoot away, but I wanted to develop some pick and pop chemistry. I mean, too often he would pick and then maybe roll and clutter the lane, or he'd be hesitant to pop out to the 3-point line. He would just sit inside the 3-point line just a little bit, a couple steps, which it seemed to be a thing that Jason Kidd was pushing on him after he was having a cold spell at the start of the season. So he said, just step in one step and maybe you'll make some shots. I whatever. That was bizarre to me. But I think if he's able to develop that kind of offensive role where he knows he's a guy who should be on the perimeter, he doesn't have that many skills inside, he has trouble finishing off 2 feet, he has trouble finishing quickly with the ball. I mean, it's always like some weird art show with him if he even gets the ball and tries to put it in the basket with a hoop shot. It's crazy to watch. So I think for him, the most important thing is knowing his lane and knowing that his lane right now is his potential as a 3-point shooter and his potential on the defensive end, which is guarding guys on the perimeter. And a lot of that will be up to Bud's scheme and that kind of stuff. But hopefully we'll get there, because we are certainly a long, long time away from the days when Thon Maker would get in the game and the Bradley Center would just absolutely lose it for even just a made shot.
Yeah, but that one crossover of Chris Birdman Anderson was sick.
That was good.
You're right. Man, sick dribble. Look at that handle.
All right, never mind. More of that. Only Thon Maker should be point guard. Okay.
That's worse than my Ursan Thon take earlier.
Yeah, can we edit that out of my brain?
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of editing after this. Okay. Let's move on to Sterling Brown. Riley, what do you want to see out of Sterling Brown to have a successful season? I know you're a large Sterling Brown stan.
I am a gigantic Sterling Brown stan. Unfortunately, Greg is not here. He goes by that moniker, so he's the father of the Sterling Brown stan movement. But I think there's a possibility he could take a massive leap forward. And, for whatever reason, Sterling's kind of depends on your own perspective. I thought he showed a lot of good tools. And I think there's a possibility where he could slot into even a Tony Snell role where Tony's not expected to handle the ball. Tony's expected to be out there to shoot threes and play competent defense. Whereas we've seen Sterling, whether that be in summer league, this past summer league where he looked really, really good, not as good directly on ball, facilitating the offense, but we know he brings it on defense. He's a decent rebounder, and he's generally not afraid. Again, this is another thing. Seemed like, I don't know if he was hesitant or being told not to really focus on the three and just drive the ball toward the basket, where he wasn't the most efficient scorer. But I think there's definitely a possibility where he could see jumps in his minute production. If you give me a few minutes, I can come up with some theoretical numbers I'd like to see. But I think there's a possibility for him to carve out, a more permanently being the backup, shooting guard or being one of the backup guards. And he had 50 games last year that he appeared in. And obviously, stuff off the court wasn't, ideal. We can leave it at that. But I think if he can up his appearances, up his minutes, and I think that's all definitely a possibility. It just seems like he has potential to be a huge, progression candidate for the Bucks.
Yeah, he had 14.4 minutes last year in his 54 games that he appeared in. Just 3.8 attempts per game, 40% overall, which is okay. Mitchell, what are you thinking for Sterling?
I do agree with everything Riley said. It's funny that you mentioned adapting some of Tony Snell's game. I have a different Tony in mind for Sterling Brown. I want him to find a way to adapt himself and become as close as he can to Tony Allen on defense. He's for a wing player, he's very strong. He's got good measurables. He's got very good instincts. I know our good friend Dean Maniat, he's at All the Bucks, last year put together a clip package that showed a lot of really, really, really advanced defensive skills that Sterling Brown demonstrated that he just did naturally. And that's fantastic. That's a great way to find a way to hang in the NBA. So if he can get his shooting up to par and he can continue to be a badass on defense, that's what he has to do. I don't know how many NBA coaches worry about the amount of technicals that their players incur over the course of the season. Probably whoever is DeMarcus Cousins' coach or Steve Kerr with Draymond. But everybody else probably isn't. It's not the front of their mind. I definitely would love for Budenholzer and company to take the cap off of any limit they have for technical fouls and let Sterling just go wherever he needs to, do whatever he has to in order to just irritate and frustrate the other team, because he can do that and he's not afraid to step up to anybody. It's not wonderful that the team's best enforcer is a second round sophomore that doesn't play a lot of minutes, but he's got the ability to do that, and there's definitely a place for that in the league, and there's so many ways that helps your team, and that's what I want Sterling Brown to do. The shooting is the shooting. I don't want him to develop his offense any further. He's going to have to space the floor because he doesn't have any other NBA ready skills, but that defense, man, if he can find a way to just be miserable and make life awful for the players that he guards, and maybe he gets a lot of double technicals, that's even better because then there's no free throws getting shot. But whatever he has to do that. Also, he's got to grow his hair back out because his hair looked great grown out. The short, not so much, but with his hair grown out, it looks amazing.
I do miss his hair. For me, so you steered into the defensive skid. For me, I was thinking more offensive. So I wanted his 3-point percentage to tick up a few notches. So he shot, was it 35? Sorry, I just had it here. 35.2% from three last year, I think, on 1.7 attempts per game. So, it's okay. I mean, that's a decent number. Coming out of college, I mean, he shot on 136 attempts his senior year, 44.9%, 79% from the free throw line on 110 attempts that year. So I was kind of hoping it would be a little bit higher, and I think there's a chance it could tick up higher. I mean, you certainly don't need it to be at 39 or 40% for him to be the kind of spacer that you're looking for. But I agree with you guys that I think he has a lot of really intriguing defensive skills, and I think he offers one of the better chances just because he's only entering his second year for Milwaukee to have like a really viable, good defensive wing 3-and-D guy, who I know we have Tony Snell and Chris Middleton, which is great, but if you just look at the bottom part of the roster, I just don't see as much potential upside in those guys to turn into really valuable NBA players. And I mean, Sterling Brown is older, so he doesn't have a lot of time to realize that kind of upside yet left, but I just feel like he has a lot of potential to become a very valuable player in the NBA, at least definitely in terms of today's NBA, if he's able to get that 3-point shooting up a little bit. And obviously that'll contribute on the court, and who knows? I mean, he also could be a valuable trade chip if he's able to shoot that kind of percentage, should Milwaukee want to go that way.
I was just gonna say if he develops in kind of the direction that we're all theorizing that if he has a good year, he could possibly develop, that would give the front office a bit of flexibility, especially in the guard rotation, which would be welcome given all the questions they're gonna have to be dealing with in, just an off season from now, what to do with the 1 and the 2 positions.
For sure. All right, let's move on to Malcolm Brogdon. Mitchell, what do you want on Malcolm Brogdon this year?
For Malcolm Brogdon's in a weird place, man. Like he is a wonderful character. He's just seems to be a great human being, incredibly smart. And had a really unfortunate, a bad break last year with that quad injury, and thankfully it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But he played well in his rookie year. He played well in the games he did get last season. He didn't play so great in the playoffs, but he seems remarkably solid, and that's really cool. He is also heading into free agency next year because of the nature of his contract as a second-round pick. So whatever the situation is where the Bucks, get a chance to pay him to keep him, he has to prove that he's worth, hypothetically, that money. And so what I want from Malcolm Brogdon is I want him to show, kind of similar to my lecture to DJ Wilson, to show one NBA level skill. I want Malcolm Brogdon to show one elite skill, just one. I don't care what it is. If shooting would be, again, the top pick, if he can bump his shooting up to like really impressive levels, like 42, 43, 45%, that would be wonderful. He, similar to Delly, spends a lot of time with the ball in his hands, and he's not exactly an offense stopper. He's not going to bring things skidding to a halt necessarily, but he does gum the system up a little bit. Now, then again, the system he was gumming up, maybe that was better than it actually operating as intended because it was such a poorly designed system under Jason Kidd. That notwithstanding, I have a hard time figuring out what else Malcolm Brogdon can be unless he shows off an elite skill. And then the most likely skill for that to be is shooting. And if he is not going to be an elite shooter, is he worth that contract that he might get next summer from the Bucks or from another team? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that in general. He's a super solid player in a whole bunch of different aspects. So how much more can you really ask for if you're, average to slightly above average at pretty much everything you'd expect from a guy coming off the bench? I think we could probably, it's going to be difficult to tell how he fits within Bud's system. Ideally, you can work your way into Bud's good graces and kind of, maybe work your way into the closing lineup. But if he's going to continue to be kind of like the lead guy off of the bench, depending on, if they rotate to make sure that Giannis or Chris is on the floor at all times, I would, especially since he has the ball so often, you don't have to do the heavy lifting on offense. If he could, maybe become slightly better a slightly better playmaker, or do a little bit better at keeping the ball moving and kind of directing the offense, and let the others who are on the floor do the heavy lifting if they're of a certain level of player. And obviously it's a bench unit, so it's not exactly the highest level, but I think he has definite possibility to, and he's shown it in the past. He had a 24.3% assist rate in in his rookie year, so he's shown the ability to pass the ball and open up teammates. So return to that maybe. And then just in general from his perspective, I would say two things. If you could transition to a slightly less physical style of play, because there are already concerns about his feet. He's an older rookie, obviously. He had the quad injury last year. So given that this is a contract year for him, stay healthy, have the requisite contract year level of production, and a little bit of playoff success as well, because the team could really use it.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I see. I would love if Malcolm Brogdon developed an elite skill. I guess my stuff was more modest, like stuff tinkering around the edges. He's shot a lot better on pull-ups last year as compared to the year prior. So his effective field goal percentage on it was 149 field goal attempts his rookie year. Effective field goal percentage was 38.6 on pull-ups. Last year, that ticked all the way up to 52.7% on 128 attempts. So I thought, especially earlier in the year, he showed a decent ability to pull up from three. And this is a guy who has a pretty slow shot attempt, as we all know. So him being able to flash that kind of skill was intriguing to me. I don't know if it's going to develop any further than that, but if he's able to at least maintain those numbers, or even just be a little bit lower, that'll be a significant advancement in terms of his game. I miss him having a little bit of chemistry with Milwaukee centers. Brog Rowe was a real thing. He really seemed to have like amazing chemistry with Greg Monroe and knew where he was going to be. I'd like him to be able to develop that. If he's going to be driving, develop that with some of the other guys on Milwaukee's roster who might be cutting in, whether that's Giannis, or if Brook is there for a quick dump off, or even if Tyler Zeller happens to get those minutes. If John Henson can figure out a way to finish quicker, that would be great. And then other small thing was, I don't know. I know he has trouble getting to the basket. He doesn't have great moves and that kind of stuff, but I wish he was able to draw fouls at a little better rate. He only averaged 1.8 free throw attempts per game last year, and he's an 88.2% free throw shooter. So even if he was able to get that up to 3 an extra point per game or so, I would I think that could be a couple promising tinkering parts to his game to have a successful season for me.
Yeah, he is kind of a bubble guy. Brogdon is for me in terms of where he's going to end up under Mike Budenholzer's system. Like there exists a universe in which Malcolm Brogdon excels in Bud's system, where there's a lot of off-ball movement and there's a high emphasis placed on sharing the ball and positioning outside the arc rather than a really rudimentary NBA offense. There also exists a universe in which he just doesn't become more than he is. And it's not that he isn't a good NBA player, but he's a good NBA player on a minimum contract right now. If he's a good NBA player on Tony Snell money, that doesn't move the needle enough to really merit getting excited about that percentage of your cap going to him. So it's that. I don't know. It's tough. I can see a lot of variance in terms of projecting what he is going to become over the course of this year, and then whether or not the Bucks can even afford to pay him to keep him long term, or if they even should. There's tons of questions about who has historically been a pretty consistent player over his 2 years.
Speaking of that Tony Snell contract, let's move on to Tony Snell next for our expectations. I know at least Mitchell and I are Snell stands, so let's let Mitchell just go ahead and just dive right in on this one.
I know this is exactly what Tony Snell needs. This is exactly what he needs. I'm gonna use an extreme hypothetical, but just come with me on this journey. Let me paint the picture with my words. I'm gonna bring Tony Snell into that same room that I spoke to DJ Wilson and Malcolm Brogdon and asking them for skills, but I don't have a demand from him. I just have a form. It's a form CV-450. Do either of you guys know what that is?
No,
I don't.
Okay, it's probably good because you're not lawyers in the state of Wisconsin. I had to just Google it 5 minutes ago, so it's not like I had it memorized either. But that is a petition for name change form. And I want Tony Snell to change his name to Mirza Teletovic. Tony needs to let it fly. He needs to shoot. He needs to shoot everything. He cannot hesitate. The only bad Tony Snell three is the three that Tony Snell does not take. He needs to shoot. He needs to shoot everything. He's a good shooter. He's got very good form. He's got good height for his position. He's very consistent. He's been a 40% shooter the last, 2 years? Like, he makes those shots. And yeah, he goes through ebbs and flows just like every other shooter in the league. But he just needs to let it fly all the time. All the time. And I'll tell you why I want him to become the new Mirza Teletovic and have a ridiculously high, like an 80% three-point rate. It's all to do with his confidence as an NBA player. It's a well-known, kind of like an unofficial secret that everybody is kind of aware of, is that Tony Snell really just struggles with self-confidence, probably in large part due to the way that Jason Kidd managed his team, which we all know was not a good way to manage a team of professionals. And if Tony Snell doesn't believe in Tony Snell, he's going to struggle. And that's just the way it is. But we believe in him. His teammates believe in him. I would love to think that Budenholzer and the new coaching staff believes in him. I want Tony Snell to believe in Tony Snell. I want him to shoot everything all the time. And I really do think that is going to take his game up a level.
Yeah, it's Tony Snell is so bizarre because, yeah, as you alluded to, he has these confidence issues, and yet when you look at his numbers, his 3-point attempts in Chicago paled in comparison to his ones in Milwaukee. So, his first 3 years in Chicago, 178 his rookie year, 32%, 197 attempts, 37%, 155 attempts, 36%. Comes to Milwaukee 2 years ago, 355 attempts, shoots up to 40.6%, 268 attempts from three, 40.3%. Meanwhile, the whole time his usage rate has been slowly trickling down as well. So, I mean, the increase in volume only improved his 3-point shooting, and that's a really healthy amount of volume. So the shooting by Tony Snell is real. 40% is what you can expect. And we would hopefully hope for in years going forward. So I'm completely in line with Mitchell. I am totally all in on Tony Snell. I think he should shoot as much as possible. I was literally in my notes, I had Mirza Teletovic's 10.2 3-point attempts per 36 that he had. I want Tony Snell to be at that. Wayne Ellington was a guy who had, over 10.2. Same thing, 3-point attempts per 36. Like, those are the kind of things that I want to see out of Tony Snell. I don't want him to have to worry about anything else. I want him to just be like, if he gets the ball, he should just shoot it because he doesn't have a great dribble drive. He doesn't have a whole lot of other skills to offer, but he does have an elite skill already in the league, which is 3-point shooting. And I think he needs to just be able to let it fly as much as possible, just like Mitchell said.
Jeez, you guys are fired up about this. My God.
I'm all in on Tony Snell.
Shoot everything. Shoot everything. Like, you hear that? That better be Tony Snell taking a 3. Otherwise, I'm not happy because he needs to shoot everything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the beauty of Tony is that he has no issues whatsoever at being like a relatively low usage guy. So he fits perfectly with the starting unit. You guys said everything pretty much perfectly. Even if he started just jacking threes left and right, I'm sure his usage percentage would probably still go down throughout the season just because that's what Tony Snell does. The only issue for Tony is the amount of money he's making, and that's not his problem. That's the Bucks problem. So if we could keep the number of tweets in Buck Twitter lamenting the amount of money that Tony is making to like 200 a night or something like that, just across Bucks Twitter, I think that would be an awesome season for him.
I'm glad you brought that up because that has really, really ground my gears lately. When people in Bucks Twitter and all across NBA Twitter put Tony Snell in the same bucket as Matthew Dellavedova and John Henson and the aforementioned Mirza Teletovic, who very sadly is probably not in the league anymore for very good reasons related to his safety. I would love for Telly to be able to be in the NBA anymore, but I do look forward to his contract coming off the books. But Tony Snell is not the same guy as those other guys. Yeah, maybe they all are maxed out in terms of their own room to grow as basketball players, in terms of having reached their ceiling, their different ceilings respectively. But Tony Snell is not that guy. He's much more useful than Delly or Henson. He's the prototypical 3-and-D wing who got a contract that was at the market rate for a 3-and-D wing. And yeah, he's not a lockdown defender. He's not Kawhi. And he's not Steph Curry, shooting off the dribble, but he doesn't have to be. He has to stay out of the way and eat minutes and just execute on both ends of the floor. And that's it. And that's not a bad thing. Sometimes you're going to pay for that. It's just get off Tony Snell's back. Leave Tony Snell alone.
Well, and it's easy to do revisionist history when all these everyone's under a cap crunch now. I mean, it's just like not great luck. I mean, if Tony Snell was coming on a contract this year, he probably would have been paid a little bit less. But at the time, I mean, I think it's a very reasonable deal, especially considering he had far more upside than Dellavedova or Henson or any of those guys that were signed that summer. And I mean, the sins of the past. At some point, you kind of have to let them go. And I think this Tony Snell contract made sense at the time, and it didn't feel like there were outrageous outcries then. It just happens that sometimes he might disappear. And I think if they're able to up his 3-point attempts per game, I mean, I think that's going to be a valuable enough trait for him to be maybe not worth fully that amount, but I mean, relatively close to it.
Yeah. If Tony Snell goes from averaging 7 points a game to like close to 10 because he's taking and making more threes, like all of a sudden that contract doesn't look so bad.
Yep. Totally agree. All right. So let's move on. I guess we're up to the marquee three now. Let's start with Eric Bledsoe. Riley, what are you hoping out of Eric Bledsoe this year?
So to be honest, the first thing that I wrote was end the season on a different team or underline become a free agent in a tepid point guard market. Obviously that would not be good. Sorry. Oh. Well, that wouldn't be good for him, but it would be generally good for the team. No, I mean, he was really effective in the regular season. So obviously replicating that, in terms of numbers, I'm not sure if there's much in the way that you could ask him to like see increases realistically. Obviously, if his 3-point percentage, if he could, maybe just a slight hair above the 34% that he shot last year, that would be great. But obviously, given the style of play and everything like that, maybe not realistic. So if he can kind of stay around, his average for his career, and then embrace Coach Bud, because I was looking through his previous coaches and throughout his NBA career, he's had Vinny Del Negro, which, pour one out for Vinny. And then there was, why can't I remember his name in Phoenix? Hornacek. Hornacek.
Yeah, Jeff Hornacek.
Yep. And then, obviously Phoenix exploded into, a morass that it is now. And then he had Jason Kidd. So that was pretty much like, and, whoever was after Hornacek. But Bud is you could say almost his first real NBA coach. So I just want to see him buy into whatever it is that Bud demands. We've seen in Bud's system in the past that he's able to make guards who probably aren't elites look almost like they can be. So I'm curious to see, given the skill set that Eric does have, which is very good at what he does, but maybe a little limited in some aspects, how Bud makes it happen. But if he can just embrace it, that would be the best for everybody involved. Don't be petulant and keep tweets about not wanting to be here to a 0 for the year.
Yeah, well, I don't think that we're at risk of him wanting to hair salon his way out of Milwaukee the same way he was out of Phoenix when the situation there was not good. It's better now. Like I'm pretty high on Kokoskov, their new coach. And the trade that they swung for Ryan Anderson. Ryan Anderson isn't that exciting, but DeAnthony Melton is interesting. But that's enough. This isn't the Bright Side of the Suns podcast. This is the Brew Hoop podcast. Eric Bledsoe is a gambler, and he's always been able to gamble because his decisions are the equivalent of writing checks that he somehow, because he's so talented and so gifted, is able to come through on. He's able to cash those checks because of his natural skill and natural talent. He needs to really tamp that down, and that is, to your point, Riley, going to really come back to coaching. A couple of numbers that I put together when looking at this for Eric Bledsoe. He had a 1.7 to 1 assist to turnover ratio last season. Not miserable, but definitely not good, especially for a point guard. And that was on a usage of 26.1%. So it's really high. So what that means is that Eric Bledsoe is dominating the ball, which makes sense. That's the type of player he is, and that's generally how he's his best. And he's not a bad passer, but his decision-making could stand to improve, and that just comes down to discipline. He needs to be more disciplined and be more judicious about the decisions that he makes. And that's going to really come down to the habits that he builds with Mike Budenholzer and his teammates during their random unofficial mini camps in New York, like we saw a couple weeks ago on Twitter. Another number for Eric Bledsoe: 12% of his shots last year, it was about 120 total, came between 3 and 10 feet. So right in that kind of that dead zone between at the rim and the mid range. And he only shot 37.2% on them. Those shots need to be cut completely out. That like floater zone, like he's not a bad scorer by any stretch of imagination. He's good enough to be a 20-point per game NBA player, but he needs to take smarter shots. If he wants to keep taking threes and making them at a 35-ish% rate, like I'm fine with that. I have no problem with his outside shooting. Of course, I want it to be better, but I don't expect it to improve magically. But the stuff that he can directly control, how much he dominates the ball on offense, the shots that he chooses to take when he has the ball, and the constant gambling on defense for steals. And like he averaged, over 2 steals or just about 2 steals per game last year, which is good, very good. And he's got a ton of talent defensively and can make life miserable for opposing point guards when he's being disciplined and when he's focused. And that is going to come down to the habits that he learns and unlearns this summer through training camp and through the season under a new coach. You know, he's been around the league for a while. He's going to be 29 this winter, I believe. So it's an open question as to whether he is going to be able to do that or if he's going to keep relying on instinct. And sooner or later, he's not going to have that physical talent to be able to cash those checks anymore.
So I had initially put, I think, Eric Bledsoe. Well, just piggybacking off your points, Mitchell. I think it's interesting to look at where his shots came from, because you're right. The 3 to 10 feet is kind of a dead zone, and you look at around 29.3% of his shots were in 0 to 3 feet, and 36.6% were from 3-point, which was more percentage of his shots than Chris Middleton who only had 32%. From Basketball Reference. So, I mean, if he gets that down, because he's not the greatest 3-point shooter, he takes away, 0.4% from the 3-point percentage, another 0.2 or so from the 3 to 10 feet. Because if you're a point guard at the end of the day, you're probably going to have some of those 3 to 10 feet floaters. It's just inevitable. But if he gets that 0 to 3 feet percentage up, I mean, he's a good finisher there, like a very good finisher, 70.5% in the 0 to 3 feet area. So if he's shooting, roughly 36 to 37% of his shots there, that's an amazing spot. Not to mention the fact that he is usually, with his body, he's a good finisher, obviously. And his free throw rate last year was relatively low compared to what some of his prime years were. So from 2013 through 2016-17, his free throw rate was 42.6%, 42.2%, 35%, 44.3%. It dipped down to 32.1 in 2017-18. It was 31.9 last year. But this is a guy who can get to the rim when he wants to with his speed and body up guys and force fouls. So I'd like to see a lot more of Eric Bledsoe getting down to that area.
And I'm actually pretty confident that we will see it. At the very least, the table is set for him to be able to cook that meal that we want, because he's going to have that extra foot or those extra inches of space driving and getting to the basket, because the opposing big man is going to be pulled out of the lane a little bit further thanks to Brook Lopez or Ersan Ilyasova. When we talk about Chris Middleton, hopefully with Chris Middleton's increased shooting, like the fact that this team has added so many outside shooters and placed such an emphasis on the 3-ball this year, going into this year, like everybody talks about how it's going to open up the floor for Giannis, and it will. But it's really going to open up those lanes for Bledsoe just enough. And I really do think that the exact prescription that you described, Adam, is what the result of that is going to be. And that's going to maybe Eric Bledsoe makes an all-star team. It's not crazy. Whoa. It's not crazy. I'm just saying it's not crazy. There's other better point guards out there for sure. But he's got the natural talent, and the situation is good for him. It's really good for him.
Intrigued. My other, I'd be intrigued if he made the All-Star team. My other point was I just want him to, like you said, not gamble as much and stay engaged on defense. I still feel like the apex of what we got from Eric Bledsoe defensively might have been like that first game he was in, where he like seemed to be destroying screens with his butch body and for going out and wreaking havoc in transition. I feel like it just kind of dissipated after that, and maybe that was just he was just super excited to be there and that kind of stuff. He finally got to play after Phoenix dumped him.
I want to say that part of that was the ankle injury that he dealt with. It didn't knock him out of games, but I think that really hindered his mobility, and I think that after a certain point he just wasn't able to do that same thing anymore last season. So we'll see what happens.
That's what I'm hoping for. All right, let's move on to Chris Middleton. Riley, what do you got for Chrissy Mids?
Okay, so
can I just interject? Point of order, Chairman. Never, ever use that nickname for Chris Middleton again. He's already got a great nickname. Why are we trying to shoehorn Chrissy Mids in there?
Chrissy, all right. Redacted. I'll never say it again.
Shoot your shot, Adam. I'm proud of you for trying. I just wish it was better.
It's really hot here. I'm sorry. All right, Riley, you go ahead. It's messing with my brain.
Just edit that whole section out. Okay. So everything is in the other right now, where if Chris Middleton doesn't make the All-Star team, I would say that next season is a complete and total failure for him. He's got all the, think pieces from the national media. He's been in Denmark. He's the NBA's official Danish ambassador, which is exciting for him. Everything seems to be lining up in his direction, where the East is somewhat devoid of stars, depending on, the comings and goings of a couple guys. But I would say first and foremost, you got to make the All-Star game, right? I mean, I think that's a bare minimum. And then also, we've talked about this a million times before, talked about it for season after season. If you could continue to increase the number of threes you're taking, move it up to like 6 threes a game. And if you can make like 38% of those, and I think that would just be ideal. There's a whole bunch of different things to get into, but I would say those are probably the two big things. And he had an awesome season last year, so there could be a lot of replication there, but it's just small things on the margins that he could increase and improve on, and it would just unlock so much more for him.
Yeah, for sure. To your point about increasing his threes, that's my big thing for him. Everything else remaining relatively the same. Like, he's a career 39% shooter, but his 3-point rate was only 32% last year, and it's like so much lower than his other counterparts at the top of the 3-point accuracy rankings. Like, he's got to get those threes up at a higher clip. So what I want specifically for Chris Middleton in order to have a good year is I want his 3-point rate to exceed his 3-point percentage. That's the way he's going to be on track. So if he shoots 39% from 3 again, shoots his career numbers, that means his 3-point rate has to be 40%. If he goes wild and shooting, I don't know, something crazy like 45%, like Kyle Korver numbers, great. Then his 3-point rate should be near 50. Like that's what's gonna really unlock his game as a scorer in the NBA, because he's really good. He is an underrated player in almost all of the other facets of the game, particularly his mid-range game, which is tough because we don't like it. Chris Middleton's mid-range game is a lot like eating at Chick-fil-A. It's not the most glamorous place to go, and there's a lot of people that have some problems with it, but it gets the job done 6 days a week. It doesn't get the job done all 7, right? And we saw that in the playoffs. Like, he was a flamethrower from mid-range against Boston and was making everything, but that just wasn't quite enough. And that's not to put the first round series loss on Chris Middleton's shoulders. He doesn't deserve that, but there's so many things that make him an interesting, useful, productive NBA player. I think that if his 3-point rate exceeds the 3-point percentage, that's the key to unlock him and to get him to where he wants to go, which is the All-Star game. I'll say this: he's much more likely to make All-Star than Eric Bledsoe. I will admit that.
I pretty much had the same stuff as you guys. I'd be curious where his what he does defensively this year. I feel like he's fallen off just a little bit from a couple years ago when people are talking about him as like the absolutely prototypical 3-and-D wing, and then I think his defense has been okay, but I don't think it's been necessarily elite. I'm curious how he'll fit into Bud's system in that regard. If he's going to be a guy who's playing more free safety and nabbing steals, or if Bud tries to turn him into more of an on-ball guy who can try and shut people down with his incredible length. He doesn't have great strength, but I mean, he does have the measurables to be able to be that kind of sort of stopper that he's had in Atlanta before, with whether it was Damari Carroll or that kind of stuff. And maybe he'll just fashion Sterling Brown or Tony Snell into that role. But I think there's an area for Chris Middleton to be able to improve defensively. And hopefully if he's doing less of those sort of post-ups and the grit and grind work offensively, that takes a lot more effort out of him. Hopefully he's able to expend a little bit more of that on the defensive end. So I'll just tag that on to what you guys said for a successful season. Anything else on Chris?
Yeah, the only thing, I mean, as we've discussed, or as we were kind of discussing, if he has the ability to be the focal point in offense, and part of being the focal point has been and partially it felt like Jason Kidd and company were kind of forcing that upon him, where like, okay, you're going to go do post-ups, or you're going to take a lot of mid-range jumpers. And that's fine and a nice handy tool in like extreme situations where you just need, clock's running out, you need a bucket, whatever. But if you're going to be featuring that continually as a part of your offense, at least do it when like Giannis isn't on the floor, and if you're like the main offensive guy who's dominating the ball. So just be more selective of if you're going to do sloppy or not as pretty basketball, be more selective of when you do it.
Yeah, I'll agree. Maybe perhaps the Tough Shot Express could adjust its schedule around when Giannis is on the court. I'll admit to that.
Okay, well let's get to the big kahuna then. Let's go to Giannis. Mitchell, what do you want to see out of Giannis for this year?
So this exercise is inherently unfair to players at either end of the bell curve. Like earlier on in the episode, we were talking about all these guys that on the fringes of the roster, like DJ Wilson and Tyler Zeller and some of these other guys that are not going to get a ton of minutes and not going to be relied upon. And we're being kind of glib with them. Oh, they just have to make the roster. Oh, they just have to, stay on the team and not get traded, or they'll have a good year. And that's not fair. Like, these are professionals. They're better than that. They should have their own expectations. But I mean, we're not real life NBA coaches. We're certainly not getting paid like them. So we don't need to go that deep into the edge of the roster. And it's the same sort of thing at the very top, the very tippy top of the bell curve. Or I'm sorry, not the top of the bell curve. That's average. The far end of the bell curve where Giannis lives. And like, for him to have a good year, he can't regress. He can't do less. And merely doing what he did last year will be simply a good year. And that's 27, 10, and 5, and like 3 combined steals and blocks. That's absurd. That merely a good year for Giannis is that stat line, because that puts him amongst the best of the best. But the team needs him. The team really needs him. Like there's despite the changes at the top with coaching and despite the improved shooting around, like, this team doesn't work without Giannis. Like, if he misses time for any reason and all of a sudden everybody gets bumped up a notch in the pecking order, like, that's not gonna have a pretty outcome. Like, maybe Budenholzer can make it work and make it better than a subpar coach would, but it's not gonna be great. It's not gonna be special. Giannis makes this team special. So for him to be good, he can't afford to regress. And that's not really fair to put that on him. I think that he relishes that expectation. Like, he's the kind of guy that, took that Kobe, that Mama challenge and wants to win MVP. And he is not the craziest candidate to win MVP this year. He truly isn't. But the fact that is going to have to be the baseline for a good year for him is super unfair. And I am giddy over putting that on him.
Riley?
That's pretty much about what I had. I think it's not necessary for him to like force a jump shot. He doesn't need to do it. He showed it last year that he doesn't need to, and the system's now been designed to open up the lanes even more for him, to allow him to do what he's awesome at even more. Just because I think, if he could, what I wrote down was crack 50 plus made 3-pointers, which is a really random starting point. But if he could get over that hump in terms of stats, that would be awesome. And again, it doesn't need to be like he has to be a no hesitation shooter or whatever. If he could make it a little bit more than you stand there for like 3 seconds and then take the shot, or like as you contemplate whether or not you take the shot, that'd be great. And then, as kind of Mitchell was saying, it's difficult because like expectations are gargantuan. So if he's able to get like a top 3 MVP finish, I think there's definitely a narrative that could be built around where if he has an even slightly better statistical season and the Bucks do, X number of games better, he could easily get into the top 3, if not win the damn thing. And then, top vote getter in the East, I think that's also a possibility. What else did I have written down? Oh, I guess like slight increases in assist and rebounds, especially if Brooks going to be out there and if he's embracing, or bodying up people and then opening up rebounds for Giannis, that'd be great. But otherwise, keep on keeping on. Make us proud, and also keep allusions to your future and your murky future in Greek media to like below 3.5 for this season. That'd be great.
That'd be ideal. Yes.
So this one's probably a little unfair to Giannis, but he needs to drag the Bucks to 50 wins or more. And it's not necessarily, obviously a lot of that is on the rest of the roster and coaching staff and whatnot, but I don't know if Giannis is going to be MVP and if he really wants to cement his place in the East. I think this is like, if he wants to show that he's going to take even the next leap as a player, maybe he won't statistically, but he needs to show that he's going to help drag this team to 50 plus wins. This franchise has put pretty much their entire hopes upon his shoulders. And I think for him personally, I think he wouldn't expect, I think he wants to win 50 games. I think if they won less than 50 games, I don't think he would consider it as a successful season.
Yeah.
I think he's ready to kind of be anointed on that mantle and take this franchise where they've been leading him and hope that they would lead him for years.
Yeah, so maybe we could amend that just because I'm going to be nitpicky here because I agreed. It's not fair to Giannis. It's also not fair to Budenholzer and the fact that the talent around the team, although relatively the same as last year, like they're going to be used so much better. I don't think that Giannis is going to have to necessarily drag the team along with him on the path to 50 and beyond. I think that they're actually going to be able to support him a lot better than he's accustomed to.
Drag was a bad word. I had help in here, but yeah.
Well, no, but that's also that's what we're used to, and that's the mindset that we're accustomed to because the like how successful has this team been over the last 3 years since Giannis really became the real deal? Like it's been him. It's been him pushing. It's been him dragging everything along behind it because there's so much else working against him. Like it makes sense that we would use that terminology, but I'm very optimistic that we're truly not going to have to anymore. Now, if Giannis treats it like he's going to have to drag his team to wins, but all of a sudden he finds that the resistance isn't there and they're actually keeping up with him, like it's the makings of like voters reward winning, and winning is a definite key to any sort of MVP aspirations that Giannis has. But like, remember when I mentioned the absurd possibility of Eric Bledsoe making an all-star team? If the team wins and they're playing in a way that is like really facilitates success, like I don't think it's too crazy for the Bucks to have 3 all-stars this year if they win games. I don't think that's insane. I think it's unlikely, but it's feasible, and that's really exciting.
Bud's done it before.
He has done it before.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, anything else you guys want to tack on about Giannis?
Not really. I mean, it's difficult because he's still only 24 and God only knows what the hell his ceiling is. So if he somehow comes out and blows away our expectations for another year, then God bless him.
Yeah. This is the question that I grapple with. Like the greatest player ever was Jordan. LeBron is the closest thing to that / could potentially overtake that. Like, is Giannis at this point, is he in the best position over the course of his entire career to end at a point where he's in that conversation? I would say he is. I would say that if everything went as good as it possibly could right now, and you maximized every single outcome from here on out, like he could be there. He could be at that like top tier of all timers. How crazy is that?
It's pretty crazy, especially in Milwaukee. I mean, when you think just because it's been such abject failure for so long, and
it has. But that's the thing, man. That's what's so exciting and honestly so rewarding for like having been a fan of this team for 20 years and having followed them and having covered them on the site the way that, you know, I and the two of you do, and, you know, the other people in the Brew Hoop and the other people elsewhere in the Bucks blogosphere. Like, we run out of superlatives because they get used so often. Hyperbole is so just overworked these days, but man, he is an exciting player. He's an exciting person to be around. And not around in the literal sense, but you guys know what I mean. It's just what else can you say?
He could work on that 3-point shot.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it, Riley. I think that's been an enlightening conversation going over just about every player on the Bucks roster, and some who might not even be on the Bucks roster in Taylor Zeller's case. We'll see. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Riley and Mitchell, you can do the requisite Twitter shout outs.
I'm at Riley Feldman.
And I am at Mitchell_NBA.
Yeah, and you can follow me at Adam R. Paris, and of course follow us at Brew Hoop and read all the stuff on Brew Hoop. We're going to be ramping up a lot of our season preview stuff. Of course, chime in on the ranking the roster stuff. Mitchell's trucking that thing along. Maybe Matthew Dellavedova will even be voted off.
Please vote him off. My God.
But in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes, review us. We always appreciate it. And thanks again for listening. We'll be back again soon.